Hi, it's Mr. Jacobson, and today we are going to go into Chapter 3, Ratios and Proportional Relationships. And our first section in Chapter 3 is going to cover rates and unit rates. So, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to solve rates and unit rates. Before we get too far into the section, I'd like to go over some vocabulary that will be in this section and also a vocabulary term that should be review for many of you. So the first vocabulary word that we come across is what a ratio is. And a ratio is a comparison of two quantities by division. So, for example, I could write the comparison or the fraction 17 over 20. And to think that in a broader sense, like a real world example, that might be example, how many of you do your homework? So we could say 17 out of 20 students do their homework. So 17 out of 20, and the fractional representation would be 17 over 20. Now our next vocabulary word is a rate. And what a rate is a special type of ratio comparing two quantities with different units. So to think of a real world example of a rate, I'm going to give you, for example, driving. We can drive 120 miles in, let's say, 2 hours. So this is, again, going to be a ratio. I can do 120 over 2, but this time we're talking about different units. We're talking about 120 miles in 2 hours. Whereas before, this was just a ratio. We were only talking about students. They have the same unit. 17 over 20, or 17 students out of 20 students. Where here I'm talking about 120 miles in 2 hours. And one of the key words here, this word in, you'll see a lot. In is representing the fraction bar. So it's saying 120 miles in our fraction bar, 2 hours. All right, and finally, our last vocabulary word is going to be a unit rate. And a unit rate, you might see, it has the word rate in it. So it's still a ratio and they have different units, but this time the denominator will be 1. So back to the rate up here of 120 miles in 2 hours. This is saying that we can simplify this rate of 120 miles in 2 hours to having a denominator of 1, or just 1 hour. So how can I say get from 2 hours to 1 hour? Well, we divide it by 2, and what we do to our denominator we'll do to our numerator. And 120 divided by 2, or half of that, would be 60. So 60 miles in 1 hour. That's the same rate. If we drove for 1 hour, we travel 60 miles. That's a unit rate. If we traveled 2 hours, well, then we'd be going double the distance. So that would be 120 miles. All right. And that covers the main vocabulary for this section: a ratio, a rate, and a unit rate. Okay, we're going to move on now to our first example. And our first example, we're going to set up what a rate and then convert to a unit rate. So example 1, Andy biked 24 miles in 4 hours. If he traveled at a constant speed, how many hours did he ride in 1 hour? So the first thing, and a good habit to get into, is to think of the verbal wording of what you are actually comparing. How would you set it up? So the things that we're comparing is how many miles did he ride in hours? And so miles over hours. Now that we have our units, miles and hours, let's go ahead and let's just substitute in or plug in our values of what they give us. Well, it says Andy biked 24 miles in 4 hours. So I can simply write that as 24 miles in 4 hours. But that's not what the question asks. The question asks, how many did he ride in 1 hour? So if he was to only ride his bike for 1 hour, what's the distance that he would have traveled? Well, we can find that by simply taking 24 divided by 4 and 4 divided by 4. How I got 4 is, well, 4 divided by 4 will give me a denominator of 1 hour. And 24 divided by 4 would be 6, or 6 miles. So we could say that Andy bikes 6 miles in 1 hour. And we set up our verbal representation of what we're comparing, miles to hours, and then we use the information they gave us, which actually gave us a rate, 24 miles to 4 hours, and we took that rate and we made it into a unit rate. Hopefully you're starting to get the hang of this. Okay, example 2. One more. Example 2. A 12-pack of Gatorade costs $13.44. What is the unit price per bottle? Okay, so the two things we're comparing is that we're comparing the price to the cost of per bottle. And when they say per bottle, how many bottles are they talking about? Well, if I just wanted to know per bottle, I would be talking every 1 bottle. So we can set up our verbal representation of the cost or the price to the cost of a bottle. Now, the information they give us is a 12-pack costs $13.44. So let's go ahead and plug that in. It costs $13.44 for 12 bottles. What they did is they gave us a rate to start with. But what they're asking is they don't want to know what a 12-pack costs or 12 bottles. They really want to know what 1 bottle costs or the unit rate. So in order to go from a unit rate, well, if I know 12 bottles, to go to 1 bottle, I would have to divide by 12. And I can do the same thing here, $13.44 divided by 12. Now, for this chapter, I will allow you to use a calculator. So if we typed in $13.44 divided by 12, that would give us a cost of $1.12 per bottle of Gatorade. Okay, moving on to example 3. Okay, and then sometimes what they'll do is What they'll do is sometimes they will give you a table, and we'll have to use that table to help us find that answer or the answer that they're looking for. So, example 3 says, The price of 3 different bags of cat food are shown in the table to the right. Which bag has the lowest price per pound? Okay, so again, we'll start by setting up what they're asking us verbally. And in the problem, they want to know the price compared to the pound, or the price to the pound. Okay, so in order to find out which one has the lowest price, well, we're going to have to set up 3 different rates. What the table gives us. The first rate they give us is here. A 3.5 pound bag of food costs $4.83. So $4.83 to £3.5. Okay. The other rate that we'll set up is the cost of $9.45 to £7. And finally, the last rate we're going to set up is this one. The cost of $27.20 to £20. Okay, so in order to compare these, it's really difficult to compare these because all of their weights and their prices are different. But what we can do to compare them is to find out what's the cost for every 1 pound. That's a good way to compare all of these different rates. And by writing them per every 1 pound, we'll be able to find the unit rate of each and find out which has the lowest price per pound. Okay, so in order to go from 3.5 to 1, we would divide by 3.5. And to go from 7 to 1, we would divide by 7. And to go from 20 to 1, we divide by 20. Now, hopefully you remember what you do to your denominator or any part of the fraction, you have to do to the other part. So we would have to divide by 3.5, divide by 7, and divide by 20. Or sorry, yes, 20. Okay, back up to our first rate. Well, $4.83 divided by 3.5 would give us a cost of $1.38 per pound. For this next one, $9.45 divided by 7 would give us a cost of $1.35 per pound. And finally, the last would be $27.20 divided by 20, and that would give us a cost of $1.36 per pound. So, which bag has the lowest price per pound? Well, comparing their unit rates, this is the cheapest cost for every 1 pound. It cost $1.35 for every 1 pound. So the best buy here would be the middle one, the 7-pound bag of cat food. This is extremely helpful, especially when grocery shopping, as when you're trying to look for the best deal for your money. Obviously, the cost per pound is a big influence in your decision. At least it is in mine. Why would I buy the $27.20 bag when it's more per pound than this one? And this one's the most expensive. So keep that in mind. This is huge in our everyday life is rates and unit rates. So just for the simple fact of whether we're driving, going to the grocery store and buying something, all of those things, we can find the unit rate of an item and its cost and find out which is the better deal. Okay, moving on to example 4. All right, so For example, 4, it's asking, after 3.5 hours, Peyton traveled 161 miles. If she travels at a constant speed, how far will she travel in 4 hours? Okay, so again, we want to represent this with our verbal model of the thing that she's comparing. Well, we're comparing our units. They want to know how far or how many miles that is to the amount of hours. So we would say miles over hours. Okay. And let's go ahead and let's plug in, now that we have our units, miles to hours, let's go ahead and plug in or substitute in the quantities they give us. So it says after 3.5 hours, 3.5 hours, Peyton traveled 161 miles. And it says if she travels at a constant speed, how far will she travel in 4 hours? So we have to go through from 3.5 to 4 hours. Well, in order to do that, an easy way is to go back to that unit rate. And we know how to find a unit rate now. We just simply divide by 3.5 and divide by 3.5. And that'll give us a unit rate of her traveling. 161 divided by 3.5 or 3.5, that would be 46 miles. So she can travel 46 miles in 1 hour. Well, how does that help me? Well, if you remember the problem, they want to know for 4 hours. So what I can simply do is I can just multiply this by 4, or 4 over 1. So, 4 over 4. So 46 times 4 would give me 184 miles over 1 times 4, 4 hours. And that's our answer, is that she can travel 184 miles in 4 hours. Okay, at this time, what I want to do is I want to go over our vocabulary that we talked about in this lesson. And the first one was a ratio. It's a comparison of two quantities by division. And the example I gave you earlier was that 17 out of 20 students did their homework, or we could write that as a fraction as 17 over 20. The next vocabulary term was what a rate is. And a rate is a special type of ratio comparing two quantities with different units. So you could think of driving. You drove 120 miles in 2 hours, or now it's a fraction, 120 miles over 2 hours. And hopefully you remember the last one. The last one was a unit rate. And a unit rate's special because we can simplify it so it has a denominator of 1. So using that rate up above, 120 miles in 2 hours, that's the same thing as traveling 60 miles in 1 hour. Because if you travel 60 miles in 1 hour, well, if you drive another hour, you're going to travel 120 miles. Okay, so to wrap up this lesson, I want you to answer these essential questions, and I want you to jot them down in your notes. What is the difference between rates and unit rates? So using your definition, what's the difference between a rate and a unit rate? And I'd like you to reword it in your own words, and I'd like you to provide an example for me, other than the ones we used in class. So the ones that we used in this lecture were dealing with driving. Try to come up with a different example for me. The last one, the last essential question I'd like you to answer is, what's one way a rate or a unit rate applies to you, and also provide me an example. I hope you now know what a rate and a unit rate is, and I look forward to speaking with you in class tomorrow. Have a great evening.